Jhon stepped into the elevator of the Crystal Tower, the most exclusive and luxurious rooftop restaurant in the city. His reflection in the polished gold walls showed a man of wealth and success. The deal he was about to close tonight was crucial, a game-changing merger that would cement his company's place at the top. He adjusted the cufflinks on his tailored suit and slid his phone into his pocket, mentally preparing for the high-stakes meeting. The soft strains of classical music filled the elevator, blending with the faint scent of fresh lilies from the lobby. Jhon exhaled, ready to focus on his business, pushing aside all distractions. As the doors were about to close, a soft chime interrupted his solitude. The doors slid open again, and there she was, Mitch. For a moment, Jhon couldn't breathe. Time seemed to freeze, and all the noise in the world faded into silence. Mitch, the girl who had disappeared from his life 12 years ago without a single explanation, stood before him. The love of his youth, the one he could never forget. Mitch looked different now. Gone was the carefree girl he remembered. In her place stood a poised, elegant woman. Her dark hair cascaded in soft waves around her shoulders, and her sleek black dress accentuated her graceful figure. But her eyes, those deep, familiar eyes, were still the same. Wide, intense, full of a mixture of surprise and recognition. Neither of them spoke. Jhon's heart pounded, confusion swirling inside him. Why was she here? After all these years, why now? His lips parted, the words struggling to form in his throat. "Mitch," he finally whispered, barely able to believe it was her. Her gaze faltered for a moment, as though the flood of emotions she had been hiding threatened to break through. Then, with a subtle nod, she stepped inside the elevator. The doors closed behind her, trapping them in a small, intimate space. The soft hum of the elevator suddenly felt deafening. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Jhon could feel the tension in his chest, the unresolved pain and anger bubbling up inside him. He glanced at her, trying to read her expression, but she kept her gaze ahead, her face a mask of calm. As the elevator ascended, each second stretched into eternity. Finally, the soft chime signaled the end of their ride, and the doors opened to reveal the opulent dining hall of the Crystal Tower. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a golden glow across the room. Without a word, Mitch walked out, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. Jhon stood frozen, watching her as she made her way to a distant table where a man was waiting for her. Tall, impeccably dressed, and exuding an air of confidence. They exchanged brief smiles before she sat down, leaving Jhon behind with a flood of unanswered questions. The evening was supposed to be about business, but Jhon couldn't focus. The grand restaurant, with its sparkling chandeliers and breathtaking views of the city skyline, faded into the background as his thoughts kept drifting back to Mitch. She was just a few tables away, seated with that man, the man who seemed all too comfortable by her side. His business partner was talking, something about market trends and growth projections, but Jhon barely registered a word. His mind was locked on Mitch. Why now? Why here? After 12 years of silence, why was she sitting in this restaurant, as if she hadn't completely vanished from his life without a trace? Every once in a while, Jhon would glance in her direction. She looked different, more refined, more poised. Her gestures were graceful, her demeanor calm, but it was the subtle glances she kept throwing in his direction that caught his attention. It was as if she could feel his eyes on her, and her expressions, brief as they were, betrayed a mixture of unease and regret. Jhon clenched his fist under the table. He had built a life without her, carved out his success from the ashes of his heartbreak. When she left, it shattered him. He had thrown himself into his work, using ambition as a distraction, convincing himself that she was just a chapter of his past. But seeing her now, all of those buried feelings came rushing back. Anger, confusion, and something else, a pull, a gravitational force that he couldn't resist. "Jhon, are you with me?" His business partner's voice snapped him back to reality. Yeah, sorry," Jhon replied, forcing himself to refocus. But as his partner continued talking, Jhon's thoughts kept drifting back to Mitch. to the girl who had once held his heart and the woman who had now reappeared, stirring up everything he thought he had left behind. That night, Jhon found no peace. His penthouse apartment, usually a haven of calm with its sweeping city views and minimalist design, felt like a prison, trapping him in a maze of old memories. He lay on his bed, staring up at the ceiling, unable to shake the image of Mitch from his mind. It had been over a decade since he last saw her, but the memories were still as vivid as ever. He could still picture the two of them in high school, young and full of dreams. They had been inseparable, convinced that their love was strong enough to survive anything. They spent hours talking about their future, their careers, their plans to travel the world, to build a life together. Then one day, she was gone. No note, no explanation. She vanished from his life as if she had never existed. He tried to find her, of course. He called, sent messages, even reached out to mutual friends. But Mitch had disappeared without a trace, leaving him to pick up the pieces of his broken heart. The pain had been unbearable at first, but over time, he learned to live with it. He had thrown himself into his work, becoming a self-made success story, a symbol of ambition and determination. But deep down, the scars of her absence never truly healed. Now, after 12 years, she was back, and all the questions he had buried along with his feelings were clawing their way to the surface. Why did she leave? Where had she gone? Why hadn't she told him anything? Jhon tossed and turned, his mind racing. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to let her slip away without them this time. The following evening, Jhon found himself at another high-profile event, a charity gala at the Grand Horizon Hotel, one of the most prestigious venues in the city. As an honored guest, his presence was expected, but his thoughts were far from the glitz and glamour of the evening. He couldn't stop thinking about Mitch, about how she had reappeared in his life like a ghost from his past. He needed to understand why. He needed closure, even if it meant reopening old wounds. As he made his way through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries and nodding at familiar faces, Jhon caught sight of her again. Mitch, standing by a tall window, the city lights casting a soft glow around her. She looked lost in thought, her arms folded across her chest as she gazed out at the skyline. Jhon's heart raced. This was his chance. He couldn't let her slip away again. Without hesitation, he walked toward her, his footsteps slow but determined. As he approached, Mitch must have felt his presence, because she turned to face him. Her eyes widened slightly, her surprise evident. "Jhon," she said softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," Jhon replied, his voice steady, though the storm of emotions swirling inside him was anything but calm. "But we need to talk." Mitch hesitated, glancing around as if considering an escape. But after a moment, she nodded, her expression resigned. "Okay," she whispered. They stepped out onto the balcony, the cool evening air providing some relief from the tension that clung to them. The city buzzed below, a constant hum of life that seemed distant compared to the charged silence between them. "Why did you leave, Mitch?" Jhon's voice broke through the stillness, filled with years of bottled-up frustration. "Why did you just disappear?" Mitch looked down, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the railing. "It wasn't that simple, Jhon," she murmured. "Then explain it to me, because I spent 12 years wondering what happened. You owe me that much." She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and regret. "My family. We were in trouble. I couldn't stay. It was too dangerous." Jhon's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about? What kind of trouble?" Mitch's voice wavered as she continued. "My father. He was involved in something bad. We had to leave everything behind. I didn't have a choice." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Jhon felt like the ground had been pulled from beneath him. Danger? Family secrets? It was more than he had ever imagined. He stared at her, trying to process everything she had just said. But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of the truth, and he wasn't going to stop until he knew it all. Jhon's head spun with Mitch's revelation. Her family had been in danger? That's why she disappeared all those years ago. He had so many more questions, but the weight of the truth pressed down on him like a suffocating cloud. She hadn't left by choice. She had been forced out of his life. But the pain of those lost years still gnawed at him. You couldn't have told me? You couldn't have reached out? You left me in the dark, Mitch. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Jhon's voice was firm but cracked with emotion. Mitch's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she shook her head. I couldn't, Jhon. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But we were running, hiding. My father got mixed up in something dangerous, and we were being hunted. I didn't know where we were going to end up, or if we'd even survive. Jhon's heart clenched. There was so much sorrow in her voice, but it didn't dull the ache in his chest. You didn't trust me enough to tell me? You didn't think I would have helped you? I couldn't drag you into it. You had your whole future ahead of you, and I was terrified. I didn't know how to explain it. My father wouldn't let me. It was all so chaotic. Mitch's hands trembled as she wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to shield her heart from the very memories that haunted her. They stood in silence for what felt like an eternity, the city lights twinkling in the background like stars mocking the darkness between them. The air was thick with emotions neither could name, a tension neither could ease. Finally, Jhon spoke, his voice low, barely above a whisper. So, what now? Mitch looked up at him, her gaze filled with uncertainty. I don't know. I didn't plan on seeing you again. I didn't think we'd ever cross paths. But now, I don't know what to do, Jhon. Jhon's jaw tightened. He didn't know what to do either. All he knew was that the woman standing in front of him had left a gaping hole in his heart, and now that she was back, that hole felt deeper than ever. For the next few days, Jhon tried to focus on his work, but no matter how hard he pushed himself, his thoughts always drifted back to Mitch. The charity gala had ended, but the encounter had left him restless. He couldn't shake the image of her tearful eyes, the sound of her trembling voice. The revelation of her family's danger had answered some questions, but it had also opened 1,000 more. As he sat in his office, staring at the city skyline through his floor-to-ceiling windows, Jhon knew he needed closure, or maybe he just needed more time with her. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. Can we talk? Mitch. His heart skipped a beat. He stared at the message for a long moment before replying. Where? A few minutes later, the response came. The park by the river. 6 p.m. Jhon exhaled sharply, his mind racing. What was she going to say? Was she going to leave again? Or was there something more she wanted to tell him? He checked the time. It was already late afternoon. He had to go. He couldn't let this chance slip away. The park by the river had always been a peaceful spot for Jhon, a quiet place to think. But tonight, it felt different. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the water, and the air was cool and crisp. People walked by, laughing, chatting, enjoying the evening. But Jhon's eyes scanned the path ahead, searching for her. Then he saw her. Mitch stood by the edge of the river, her back to him, the wind playing gently with her hair. She was still, as if lost in thought, just like the night they met again at the gala. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure if he should approach. But the pull between them was undeniable. Mitch, he called softly. She turned, her face a mixture of relief and apprehension. Jhon. He walked toward her, the tension between them hanging heavy in the cool evening air. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the sound of the rushing river filling the silence. I've been thinking about what you said, Jhon began, his voice steady, though his heart raced beneath the surface. About your family, about why you left. Mitch nodded slowly, her eyes searching his for understanding. I didn't want to hurt you, Jhon. Leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done. Jhon's chest tightened. I don't know what to do with this, Mitch. I spent years trying to move on, and then suddenly, you're here, and everything I buried comes rushing back. I don't even know where to start. Mitch took a deep breath, her hands fidgeting nervously. I didn't expect to see you again, either. But now that we've crossed paths, I don't want to walk away from this without explaining everything. You deserve that." Jhon looked at her, the woman who had once been his everything. The pull of the past was too strong to ignore, but the pain of their lost years still loomed large. "Then explain it, Mitch. Tell me everything." Mitch's breath trembled as she began speaking, her voice barely audible over the soft rush of the river behind them. "After I left, my father got involved in some really dangerous things. He owed money to people you don't mess with. I didn't know how deep he was in until it was too late. One night, they came for him. We had to flee, Jhon. We couldn't even go home to pack. We just disappeared." Jhon listened in silence, his fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but the weight of the years between them made it impossible to know how. "I begged him to let me reach out to you, but he wouldn't hear it. He said anyone connected to us would be in danger, too. I didn't want to believe him, but when they started coming after us, I knew he was right. We moved from city to city, always looking over our shoulders. It was hell." Jhon's jaw tightened. His voice was strained as he spoke. "So all these years, asking for..." And so, with the past still looming between them, Jhon and Mitch began their fragile journey toward reconciliation, unsure of what the future would hold, but unable to deny the undeniable pull that still connected them. Though Jhon had agreed to take that first step with Mitch, his heart was still guarded. Trust wasn't something that could be restored overnight. For weeks, they continued to meet in small, quiet places where the rest of the world seemed far away. And yet, every moment with Mitch felt like walking a tightrope. One wrong step, and everything could come crashing down. One evening, they met at the rooftop of a luxury restaurant, a place Jhon had been frequenting for years. The view of the city sprawled beneath them, the skyline glittering like jewels against the night sky. Mitch was already seated, looking out at the horizon, lost in thought. Jhon sat across from her, his gaze lingering on her profile for a moment before speaking. "Do you ever think about what could have been?" Mitch blinked, her eyes distant. "All the time. I imagine a world where I didn't leave, where we faced everything together. But imagining it doesn't change what happened." Jhon took a sip of his drink, the bitterness lingering in his mouth. "No, it doesn't. But it also doesn't erase the fact that we had something good before. I don't know if that part of us is still there." Mitch looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "I don't expect things to be the same, Jhon. I just want us to be honest with each other about where we stand now." Jhon's chest tightened. Honesty. Wasn't that what had been missing all along? He leaned forward slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where do you think we stand, Mitch?" Mitch hesitated, her eyes meeting his with a vulnerability he hadn't seen in years. "I think we're both scared. Scared of what could happen if we try again, and even more scared of what happens if we don't." Jhon didn't respond immediately. He could feel the weight of her words, the uncertainty that loomed between them like a shadow. "Maybe you're right," he finally said, his voice low. "But fear can't be the only thing we hold on to." Before Mitch could respond, a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance of the rooftop. Jhon instinctively turned toward the noise and saw a figure that sent a chill down his spine. Rico. Rico had been one of the men Jhon had tangled with years ago during his rise in the business world, a ruthless rival with connections to dangerous people. Jhon's blood ran cold. He hadn't seen Rico in years, but the memory of their last encounter was still fresh. Mitch noticed the tension in Jhon's posture and followed his gaze. Her breath caught when she saw Rico approaching, his eyes locked on them. "What is he doing here?" Jhon muttered under his breath. Rico strode toward them with a predatory grin. "Jhon, it's been a while. Fancy seeing you here, and with such lovely company." Jhon's eyes narrowed. "What do you want, Rico?" Rico chuckled, his voice smooth yet laced with menace. "Relax. I'm just here for dinner, same as you. Didn't mean to interrupt, whatever this is." Jhon's fists clenched under the table. He wasn't sure if Rico was here by coincidence, or if it was something more. His mind raced as he tried to assess the situation. Was Rico part of the dangerous past Mitch had spoken about? Had he been involved in her family's troubles? Rico's eyes flicked toward Mitch, a sly smile playing on his lips. You know, it's funny. You think you've left the past behind, but it always finds a way to catch up with you. Mitch paled, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair. Jhon could feel the fear radiating from her, and it was all he needed to know that Rico wasn't here by chance. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood, his voice steely. Get lost, Rico. You're not welcome here. Rico's grin widened, but he raised his hands in mock surrender. No need to get worked up, Jhon. I'm just passing through, but you might want to watch your back, both of you. With that, Rico turned and walked away, leaving a suffocating tension in his wake. Jhon sat back down, his mind racing. Mitch was trembling slightly, her face pale. Who was that? She asked, her voice barely audible. Jhon swallowed hard. Someone you don't want to mess with, and I have a feeling he's connected to whatever trouble your family was in. Mitch's eyes widened, and she shook her head. No, it can't be. I thought we were safe now. I thought everything was behind us. Jhon reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. Together. The unsettling encounter with Rico cast a long shadow over the next few days. Jhon couldn't shake the feeling that the past he had worked so hard to escape was now closing in, threatening not just him but Mitch as well. He wasn't sure how deep Rico's involvement went, but he knew one thing for sure. He needed answers. Mitch had been quiet ever since that night at the restaurant. Jhon could see the fear in her eyes, the way she flinched at sudden noises or unexpected calls. She had been through so much already, and now it seemed that the danger she thought she had left behind was creeping back into her life. One evening, Jhon found Mitch sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at a small, worn photograph. It was of her father, a man Jhon had never met but whose presence loomed large over everything Mitch had been through. Jhon sat beside her, his voice gentle. What happened to him, Mitch? What really happened? Mitch sighed, her fingers brushing over the edges of the photo. After we left, things got worse. My father, he wasn't just in debt. He was involved in illegal deals with people like Rico. They were after him, and we were always on the run. One night, they found us. Her voice faltered, and Jhon placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You don't have to say. You're not ready for. Mitch shook her head, determined. No, you deserve to know. They came after us and my father. He didn't make it. He was killed. That's when my mother and I went into hiding. We thought we were safe after that. But seeing Rico again, I don't know what it means. Jhon's mind raced. Rico had hinted at something more that night, something that Mitch's family had been involved in. But if her father was dead, why were they still being hunted? What secrets had he left behind? We need to find out why Rico's still after you, Jhon said firmly. This isn't over. As days passed, Jhon and Mitch tried to piece together the fragments of her family's past. Rico's shadow loomed large over everything, and Jhon knew they couldn't sit back and wait for the next move. If Rico was involved in her father's criminal activities, they needed to uncover what was at stake before it was too late. Mitch's memories of those years were fragmented, filled with fear and uncertainty. But there were pieces of the puzzle that didn't add up. Why was Rico still so interested in her? What did her father leave behind that could still hold value to a man like him? One night, Jhon made a decision. They couldn't hide forever. They needed to confront Rico to find out what he knew. He arranged a meeting in a neutral location where he could control the situation. Mitch was reluctant, but she trusted Jhon. They both knew it was dangerous, but they had no other choice. At an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, Jhon and Mitch waited in the dim light. Jhon's heart pounded as he scanned the surroundings, every noise putting him on edge. He was ready for anything, or so he thought. Rico arrived, flanked by two men, his signature grin plastered on his face. You two don't know when to quit, do you? We want answers, Rico, Jhon said, his voice cold and controlled. Why are you still after Mitch's family? What does her father have that you want?" Rico chuckled darkly. "It's not about what he had. It's about what he owed." Mitch's eyes widened. "My father's dead. What more could you possibly want?" Rico stepped closer, his gaze narrowing. "He might be dead, but his debts aren't. And those debts don't disappear just because he's gone. Someone has to pay. And guess what, darling? That someone is you." Jhon's fists clenched at his sides. He stepped forward, blocking Mitch from Rico's view. "You'll have to go through me first." Rico smiled cruelly. "Oh, don't worry, Jhon. I have no problem with that." The tension snapped as Rico's men stepped forward, and Jhon braced himself for a fight. He wasn't going to let Mitch be dragged into this any further. He would protect her at any cost, even if it meant facing the demons of her past head-on. The dim light of the warehouse cast long shadows on the ground as Jhon and Rico faced off. Jhon's fists clenched at his sides, ready for whatever was coming. Mitch stood behind him, her heart racing. She had trusted Jhon to protect her, but this was more than either of them had anticipated. "I don't care what my father owed you," Mitch said, her voice strong despite her fear. "You're not getting anything from me." Rico chuckled darkly. "Oh, but you're wrong, darling. You see, your father made promises. Big promises. And those promises don't disappear when someone dies." Jhon took a step forward, his body tense. "Whatever it is, you're not getting it. This ends now." Rico's eyes gleamed with amusement. "You think you can stop me? You don't even know what you're up against, Jhon. This isn't just about money. It's about power, control, and your little girlfriend here. She's sitting on something far more valuable than either of you realize." Mitch's breath caught. "What are you talking about?" Rico grinned, stepping closer. "You think your father was just some small-time criminal? He was sitting on a gold mine. Information. Secrets that people would kill for. And now, you have access to all of it." Jhon's mind raced. Information? Secrets? What had Mitch's father been involved in? And why was Rico so desperate to get his hands on it? Before Jhon could react, Rico's men lunged forward and the fight erupted. Jhon moved quickly, dodging punches and delivering swift blows, his body moving with practiced precision. He had been in enough fights to know how to handle himself, but this was different. This was personal. Mitch stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding as she watched Jhon fight. She couldn't let him do this alone. Summoning every ounce of courage, she grabbed a nearby pipe and swung it at one of Rico's men, catching him off guard. He stumbled backward, and Mitch took the opportunity to run to Jhon's side. Together, they fought off Rico's men, the tension in the air thick and suffocating. Jhon's muscles burned with the effort, but he refused to give up. He had come too far to back down now. Finally, Rico's men were down, and Jhon stood panting, his body aching but victorious. Rico glared at him, his smug grin wiped from his face. "This isn't over," Rico snarled, his voice filled with venom. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what's coming." Jhon stepped forward, his gaze cold and unyielding. "If you ever come near Mitch again, I'll make sure it's the last thing you do." Rico sneered but didn't respond. He turned and walked away, leaving the warehouse in silence. As the adrenaline began to fade, Mitch collapsed into Jhon's arms, her body trembling with the weight of everything that had just happened. Jhon held her close, his heart pounding. "It's over, Mitch. You're safe now." But even as he said the words, he knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The secrets of Mitch's past were far from uncovered, and the danger was far from over. In the days that followed, Jhon and Mitch tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the weight of the encounter with Rico lingered heavily on both of them. The danger had not passed, it had merely been delayed. Jhon's protective instincts were on high alert, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Rico had only scratched the surface of whatever her father had been involved in. Late one evening, Jhon found Mitch sitting at her desk, surrounded by old documents, letters, and photographs. Her eyes were red from hours of reading, and her expression was one of deep concentration. "Are you okay?" Jhon asked softly as he approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. Mitch sighed, rubbing her temples. "I've been trying to piece together everything my father left behind, but it's all so confusing. There are mentions of deals, codes I can't decipher, and people I don't even recognize." Jhon pulled up a chair beside her, glancing at the papers. "Maybe there's something we're missing, something hidden in plain sight." Mitch frowned, picking up one of the letters. "It's just none of it makes sense. My father was involved in some shady deals, sure, but why would Rico still be after me? There's nothing here that seems worth the risk he's taking." Jhon looked at the scattered papers and then noticed something odd. A small, old key taped to the back of a photograph of Mitch as a child. He carefully peeled it off and held it up. "What's this?" he asked, showing it to Mitch. Her eyes widened. I've never seen that before. It must have been hidden there for years." Jhon examined the key, turning it over in his hand. "This might be the key to something, literally." "To what?" Mitch asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I don't know," Jhon replied, "but it's possible your father left something behind. Something Rico wants." Mitch's heart raced. Could it be that her father had hidden something? Something important enough to warrant the years of pursuit by Rico? She looked at Jhon, her voice shaking. "We need to find out what this key opens." The next few days were spent in a frantic search for clues. Jhon and Mitch scoured every inch of her father's old belongings, looking for anything that could give them a hint as to where the key led. It wasn't until Jhon remembered an old storage unit that Mitch's family had once rented when they were on the run that a spark of hope ignited. "I remember my father taking me to that storage unit a few times," Mitch said, pacing the room, "but I haven't been there in years. What if that's where he hid everything?" Jhon nodded. "It's worth a shot. Let's go." They drove across town to the storage facility, a nondescript building tucked away in an industrial part of the city. As they approached the rusty door of Unit 147, Mitch's hand shook as she slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, and the door creaked open to reveal a dusty, cluttered room filled with old boxes and crates. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and Jhon quickly set to work, rummaging through the items. Mitch sifted through old family memorabilia, clothes, and outdated electronics. It all seemed normal. Until they found a small, locked safe hidden beneath a pile of blankets. Jhon's heart raced. This is it. Mitch knelt beside him, her breath shallow. She inserted the key into the safe's lock, and with a click, the door swung open. Inside was a stack of old documents, a ledger, and a few small, unmarked USB drives. Jhon carefully pulled out the items, his hands trembling. "What is all of this?" Mitch asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jhon flipped through the ledger, his brow furrowing. "It looks like a record of transactions, big ones. Your father wasn't just involved in illegal activities, Mitch. He was dealing with powerful people, exchanging sensitive information." Mitch's eyes widened. "But what kind of information?" Jhon picked up one of the USB drives. "I'm not sure, but if this is what Rico's after, we need to find out fast." They hurried back to Jhon's apartment, where he plugged the USB drive into his laptop. As the files loaded, a series of encrypted documents and videos appeared on the screen. Jhon's heart sank. "Encrypted," he muttered. "We need someone who can crack this." Mitch's mind raced. "I know someone. An old friend of my father's who was good with this sort of thing. He used to help us when we were on the run." Jhon looked at her, his expression serious. "Can you trust him?" "I think so," Mitch said, her voice wavering. "He's the only one who might know how to unlock this." The next day, Jhon and Mitch met with David, an old family friend and former hacker who had worked with Mitch's father in their more questionable dealings. David was in his early 40s, with a scruffy beard and a wary look in his eyes. He had gone straight years ago but owed Mitch's father more than he could repay, so he agreed to help them. "This isn't going to be easy," David said as he examined the USB drive. "This level of encryption is high-grade. Whoever your father was dealing with, they had serious resources." Jhon and Mitch watched anxiously as David began working on the files, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Hours passed, and the tension in the room grew thicker. Mitch's stomach twisted with unease. She couldn't help but wonder if they were delving into something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, David leaned back in his chair, wiping sweat from his brow. Got it. The files decrypted, revealing a trove of emails, documents, and video recordings. Jhon and Mitch leaned in, their eyes scanning the screen. It didn't take long for the full scope of her father's involvement to become clear. He was dealing with international corporations, Jhon muttered, his voice thick with disbelief, selling classified information, business secrets, even government intel. Mitch's heart sank. He was part of a bigger network. David nodded grimly. And it looks like Rico is one of the main players. He wasn't just some rival businessman. He's part of an underground syndicate that trades in these kinds of secrets. Jhon's fists clenched. So that's why Rico's after Mitch. He thinks she knows where all of this information is stored. Mitch's breath caught in her throat. But I don't know anything. I had no idea this was even happening. Jhon placed a hand on her shoulder. That doesn't matter to Rico. As far as he's concerned, you're a threat to him. And now, we have something he wants. David frowned, leaning closer to the screen. There's more. These videos? They show your father making deals, but there's one in particular that stands out. They clicked on a file labeled, The Final Deal. The video began to play, showing Mitch's father sitting in a dimly lit room across from a familiar face, Rico. Mitch's blood ran cold. The video showed a conversation about one last deal, one that would secure Mitch's father's safety and freedom in exchange for a final piece of information. But it was clear from the video that her father had never intended to hand over the data. He had hidden it away, leaving behind only cryptic clues in his ledger. Jhon's jaw tightened as the video ended. Your father was playing both sides. He never intended to pay Rico, and now Rico's out for blood. With the full extent of her father's dealings now laid bare, Mitch felt the ground shift beneath her. She had thought her father was a good man, trying to protect his family from a dangerous world. But the truth was far more complicated, and far more deadly. We need to make a decision, Jhon said, pacing the room. We can't keep this information to ourselves. Rico won't stop until he gets what he wants, and we can't let that happen. Mitch nodded, her mind spinning. But what do? We can't just hand it over to the authorities. Rico has connections everywhere. David, still sitting in front of the computer, cleared his throat. There's another option. We leak the information ourselves, anonymously. If this intel goes public, Rico and everyone he's working with will be exposed. It could bring down the entire syndicate. Jhon considered the idea, his mind racing. It was risky, but it might be the only way to protect Mitch and ensure that Rico never came after her again. Let's do it, Mitch said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. I won't let my father's mistakes destroy my life. Jhon nodded, his hand finding hers. We'll do this together. That night, as David worked to upload the files to a secure server, Jhon and Mitch prepared themselves for the storm that was about to come. They knew that once the information was out, there would be no going back. Rico and his syndicate would be exposed, and the danger would escalate. But they were ready. As the files went live, Jhon and Mitch watched from a safe location, their hearts pounding. The news began to spread, the scandalous details leaking out to the public. They knew they had made the right choice, even though the road ahead was uncertain. In the midst of the chaos, as the first signs of dawn began to appear, Jhon turned to Mitch, pulling her into a tight embrace. We did it. Mitch clung to him, tears streaming down her face. I hope this is the end of it. Jhon kissed her forehead gently. We'll face whatever comes next together. The fallout from the leak was swift and devastating. News outlets were ablaze with reports of high-level corruption, illegal deals, and a shadowy syndicate operating behind the scenes. Jhon and Mitch watched from a secure location as the world reacted to the explosive revelations. The exposure of such a powerful network sent shockwaves through the business and political spheres. As the days passed, Jhon and Mitch remained in hiding, knowing that the syndicate would not take the betrayal lightly. They moved from safe house to safe house, always staying one step ahead of any potential threats. Despite the constant danger, they grew closer, their bond strengthening through their shared ordeal. One night, while they were huddled in a small, secure apartment, Mitch received an anonymous message on her phone. It was a short, cryptic note. "Your father's final secret is still out there. Find it before they do." Mitch's heart raced as she showed the message to Jhon. What does this mean? Is there something else we're missing? Jhon's brow furrowed. It sounds like whoever sent this knows more about your father's hidden dealings. We need to find out what it is. They decided to follow the lead. With David's help, they traced the message to a secluded location, an old warehouse that Mitch's father had once used for his dealings. The warehouse had been abandoned for years, but it was their best chance to find any remaining clues. Under the cover of night, Jhon and Mitch approached the old warehouse. The building loomed in the darkness, its once grand structure now a crumbling shadow of its former self. The air was thick with the smell of decay and dust. Jhon and Mitch cautiously made their way inside, using flashlights to navigate through the maze of broken furniture and forgotten equipment. As they explored, Jhon's eyes caught sight of something peculiar, an old desk with a hidden compartment. "Over here," Jhon said softly, carefully prying open the compartment. Inside, they found a series of old files and a journal that looked remarkably well preserved. Mitch's hands trembled as she opened the journal. It was her father's handwriting, detailing transactions, contacts, and cryptic notes. There were references to various hidden assets and locations, but the most intriguing part was a series of sketches and codes. "This has to be it," Mitch said, her voice filled with hope. "This must be the final piece of the puzzle." Jhon examined the sketches closely. These look like blueprints for something, maybe a hidden safe or storage location. As they continued to investigate, they found a hidden trapdoor beneath a loose floorboard. With a combination of strength and ingenuity, Jhon pried it open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "We should be careful," Jhon said, his voice low. "We don't know what we're dealing with down there." They descended cautiously, the air growing colder as they went deeper. At the bottom, they found a small, steel vault embedded in the wall. Mitch's heart raced as she noticed a familiar keyhole. "This is it," Mitch said, inserting the key they had found earlier. With a satisfying click, the vault door creaked open. Inside, they discovered a trove of documents, cash, and valuable items, evidence of her father's final deals and hidden assets. But what caught Jhon's eye was a small, ornate box tucked away in the corner. It was locked with a combination. Mitch looked at Jhon, her eyes filled with concern. "What do we do now?" Jhon took a deep breath. "We need to open that box. It might hold the key to understanding the full extent of what your father was involved in." They spent hours trying to crack the combination, using the codes and clues from the journal. Finally, with a final twist, the box sprang open to reveal a collection of encrypted flash drives and a final letter from Mitch's father. Mitch unfolded the letter, her hands shaking. It was a heartfelt message, explaining his regrets and the reasons behind his actions. He had tried to protect his family while navigating a dangerous world, and his final request was for Mitch to find a way to expose the truth and clear their family's name. "I'm sorry for the pain I've caused," the letter read. "The truth must come out. Protect this information and use it wisely." Armed with the final pieces of evidence, Jhon and Mitch knew they had to act quickly. They contacted David, who helped them prepare the new evidence for public release. The information was explosive, detailing not only her father's dealings but also implicating other high-ranking members of the syndicate. As they prepared to leak the information, Jhon and Mitch were on high alert. They knew that releasing this final batch of evidence would make them prime targets. Their decision to go public meant they were drawing a line in the sand, making their stance clear. David worked to anonymize the release, ensuring that their identities remained protected. The information went live, causing an even bigger uproar than before. The public outcry was immense, with major corporations and political figures scrambling to respond. As the news broke, Jhon and Mitch took refuge in a new safe house. The walls of their temporary home felt like a fragile barrier against the storm outside. They knew that the repercussions of their actions would be far-reaching and potentially dangerous. One evening, while they were monitoring the news, Mitch turned to Jhon, her eyes filled with determination. "We've done everything we can. Now it's up to the authorities and the public to take action." Jhon nodded, pulling her into a comforting embrace. "You've been incredibly brave, Mitch. We've faced so much, but we did the right thing." Their future was uncertain, and the danger was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, they felt a sense of closure. The truth had been exposed, and the darkness of their past was beginning to lift. Months later, Jhon and Mitch found themselves slowly emerging from the shadow of their ordeal. The public fallout from the leaks had led to significant changes. Many members of the syndicate had been arrested, and the corruption that had once controlled so much of the world was beginning to unravel. Jhon and Mitch had relocated to a quieter place, away from the chaos of their former lives. The fresh start was exactly what they needed. They were no longer running from the past. Instead, they were building a new future together. One sunny afternoon, Jhon and Mitch walked through a park, enjoying the peaceful surroundings. The world was still adjusting to the changes that had been set in motion, but Jhon and Mitch had found solace in each other. "You know," Mitch said softly, "I never thought I'd feel normal again. I thought the past would always haunt us." Jhon took her hand, squeezing it gently. "The past will always be a part of us, but it doesn't have to define our future. We've faced so much together, and we've come out stronger." Mitch smiled, her eyes shining with hope. "I think we've earned a new beginning." Jhon nodded, his gaze full of affection. "We have, and we're going to make the most of it." As they strolled hand in hand, the future seemed full of promise. They had faced the darkest parts of their past and emerged into the light. And while the road ahead would still have its challenges, they knew they were ready to face them together. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.